Good evening and welcome to the Board of Education public hearing for June 17th, 2019. We have to apologize, we're a little bit behind. We had some other matters to take care of, but we'll get right into our agenda. This is the public hearing on our budget and millage rates. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford?
Here.
Mrs. Burton?
Here.
Mr. Centers?
Here.
Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mrs. Bonnefield is here. President Johnson?
Here, we have a quorum, thank you. That'll take us to item 2, our public hearing, proposed 2019-2020 budget and millage rates. And I'm going directly to
Hello.
Mrs. Smith.
Yes. Thank you, President
Good evening.
Johnson. First off, I want to thank the board for the time that you allotted for us to go over this budget in detail at our committee meeting. I want to mention that to the community. We are going to go over a very big picture presentation tonight, but we went into very detailed presentation at our committee meeting, which is posted on our website. So if anybody does want to go back and watch that, it is available. So I will start off with our budget assumptions that we used for the 2019-20 proposed budget. First off, I know that you all know this. We are without a approved budget from our legislators. They haven't passed the state aid budget yet, so we had to make some assumptions going into this budget. As you know, we have to have an approved budget in place for the coming school year by June 30th. So we made the assumption, based on the proposals that we did see from the governor, the House, and the Senate, that any increase in state aid would be sufficient enough to offset what we are projecting for declining enrollment. So that was the first assumption we made for our general fund budget. The next assumption we made was that there would be no other changes to different line items in the state budget, and we did that because we did not want to build any new expenditures into our budget based on something that we don't know as fact yet. So we thought that by keeping the expenditures the same, as well as the state revenue the same, that would be our best shot going into this. And come October, hopefully we will have a budget from the state, and we can update the board and the public at that time. The next item, the adjustments that we were made, was to various line items within the local revenue, most notably being the Wayne County Enhancement Millage revenue line. As we discussed last week, we received a large payment this year related to the 2017 collection of the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. There has been a lot of turnover in the Wayne County Treasurer's office, and so they were a bit delayed on doing their final settlements related to the 2017 collections. So we received just in March, after our budget update, north of $700,000 related to the Wayne County Enhancement Millage from 2017. So that was included in our final amendment for the 2018-19 school year, but that's something that we have to back out of the budget for 19-20, as that's not something that we anticipate continuing to see. What was adjusted, though, Wayne RESA is seeing a 2% increase in property tax values across Wayne County, which means additional Wayne County Enhancement Millage revenue. So we have included that adjustment in the proposed budget for 19-20. The other significant change on the revenue side was related to the sale of property. We had a few different properties that were closed on this school year and were included in our final amendment. Next year, as of right now, we only anticipate receiving the second half of Nankin Mills, so that's been included in the proposed budget. And the other item of note, we, for the last few years, have received a reimbursement from Wayne RESA related to special ed transportation cost. It's historically been about $750,000 per year. This year, we were reimbursed for $1.1 million of our special ed transportation cost. So in this proposed budget, we assumed, based on Wayne RESA's continued healthy fund balance in their Act 18 fund, that they would continue that larger reimbursement. So we budgeted for a $1.1 million payment to offset our special ed transportation costs for the 19-20 budget. Should that not come to fruition, I will update the board as soon as I become aware of that. On the expenditure side, again, we spent a lot of time last week going over different additions that have been made, largely made possible through the Wayne County Enhancement Millage over the last 2 years, and we are proposing continuing those additions, as well as adding some new supports across the district. So the proposed budget assumes board support of the expenditures we went over last week. We also have included some estimated change in expenditures related to our collective bargaining agreements. We had all 6 groups up this year, and we are in the process of settling all of those, so that's been included in our proposed budget as well. There's also a change in the retirement contribution rate from the state that we do know will be coming, and so while the percentage is very small, less than 0.5%, for us in our general fund that equates to about a $500,000 change in retirement costs, so that has been included in our proposed budget. So with that, we'll take a look at the numbers. Our final amendment for 1819, which is the base that we start our 1920 budget off, and then we make various adjustments. So this year, the expenditures, we started the school year off with a $22.5 million fund balance. The revenue collections this year are estimated to be $158.1 million, and expenditures at $154.5 million. So our ending fund balance is projected to be 26.1% or 16.9%. For our 1920 proposed budget, we are starting off the school year with what we estimate will be a $27.1 million beginning fund balance, and I want to make a note of the change in practice. As you'll see, our ending fund balance in the final budget is 26.1. We've historically always come in better than budgeted, both on the revenue and expenditure side, and that's largely due to the fact that by law, we are not allowed to expend any more than what's been authorized by the board. So when we bring this final amendment to you, we have yet to finish our school year, so we have to allow for some unexpected expenditures that might come in within reason. We try to be as close to where we think we'll be, but again, we have to allow for some unforeseen events that could take place. So in light of that, we have adjusted the beginning fund balance by $1 million, assuming that that the history will continue and that hopefully revenue and expenditures will come in better than what's been budgeted for the 18-19 school year. Again, we'll know that by the time we come back to the board in October with our financial statements, and we'll be able to update you on if that came through fruition. And if not, again, we'll update that in our first budget amendment. So we are anticipating revenue at $156 million next year. And we went through on the previous slide what the changes are related to the revenue. On the expenditure side, $157.1 million for an ending fund balance of $26 million or 16.5%. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at what this looks like as far as the financial stability of the district. And before I get to the charts, I do want to share some great news. We were just involved in a ratings call with Moody's rating agency, and based on our financial stewardship and some of the changes that have taken place over the last few years, we have been upgraded from A3 to A2 from A3 rating. So that's quite an accomplishment, and we're very proud of that. So good news to share. The two charts show different ways of looking at our fund balance. The one on the left is in terms of dollars, and then on the right is in terms of the percentage of expenditures. And I want to make note that an additional year has been added since we last went over this last week. We had included the ending estimated fund balance for this school year, but I've also added a column to show what the estimated fund balance is for the 1920 school year, to show that there is a planned use of fund balance. What we see is, increasing fund balance isn't set to continue to increase. We're trying to balance all of the district's priorities. One of them is financial stability, and again, being wise stewards of our resources, but we also have an obligation to help our students achieve at their maximum success, as well as the other district priority is to create and maintain a positive culture. So I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to do all three of these things. We're able to see some financial stability, and yet not at the expense of our other two priority areas. One other last mention is the recommended fund balance from the Michigan school business officials. It is 15 to 20% of your expenditures per year. So I'm happy to report that with our fund balance at just over 16%, we are within that recommended range. Moving on, we have a number of funds as required by the Michigan State Accounting Manual. We had the opportunity to go over these in detail last week, but again, just to reiterate, we have the funded projects, and that's where we account for grant revenue and expenditures. We also have our special education fund, which is where we account for the Act 18 programs that the district operates. We have the Health and Welfare Fund that our health insurance and other insurances run through, as well as our workers' comp insurance. Next would be the Food Service Fund, considered a special revenue fund where we account for our breakfast and lunch programs. The next are our debt retirement funds. We maintain 3 separate funds, one for Series 1 of the 2013 bond, one for Series 2, and then the 2014 refunding bond. Next up are our capital project funds. We have a sinking fund, a technology fund, a capital projects fund, and we have the 2013 bond Series 2 fund. We also have a scholarship fund, and the newest fund added to our books is the school activities fund. And this is something that I didn't go over with the board, so I wanted to spend a minute on. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board has passed a new statement, Statement 84, and it's related to the accounting of our student activities. And because the district has oversight over these funds, we have to report them in a different way. We will be setting up a special revenue fund, and it's going to be very basic based on the instructions that we've gotten from the state so far, but we did need to establish a budget, and so the recommendation from our auditors has been to use this past year as a benchmark for the amount of revenues that has been collected as well as the expenditures that have gone out, and to use that as a base for our proposed budget. So that was included in the board packet this past week, and will be coming to you for your approval tonight. Moving on to the 2019 taxable values, these numbers are provided by the Wayne County Assessments and Equalization Office. Our total taxable value here in the Livonia Public Schools attendance area is $4.5 billion. This is up from last year when it was $4.2 billion, so we're seeing an increase in our taxable values. On the next page is our 2019-20 proposed millage rates. In the general fund, we have our homestead, the millage on our homestead, our operating millage, which is 18 mills. This is the millage that is up for, or it's set to expire at the end of the 2020-20 school year. So this will be going to our community for support once it expires, but again, this is in place for the 2019 year. So again, proposing to levy the full 18 mills that's required for us to get our full per pupil funding from the state. We also levy 6 mills on commercial personal property. The next grouping is our debt retirement fund. These are the same mills that are proposed, that were levied this past year here in Livonia and also in the area of Westland that attends Livonia. We do our tax levies as a 50% summer collections and a 50% winter collections, so that's what's being proposed again for this coming calendar year. And next up, one other note on the debt retirement fund. The combined estimated fund balance across those 3 funds is set at 20%, which is where that MSBO, the Michigan School Business Officials, recommended fund balance is. The last but not least is our sinking fund. Our current sinking fund is good through the end of the 2019 school year, the calendar year 2019. So we'll have one more levy under this current sinking fund. Again, it'll be 50% in the summer and 50% in the winter. Due to the rising taxable values, we were subject to a Headley rollback. So last year we levied 1.1142 mills, and because of the rollback, this year it will be 1.1101 mills, which is, if everything is collected, set to generate about $5 million for the district. This sinking fund millage is set to expire at the end of 2019. So for us to see this again in the future, again, that would be something that it's going out to the community right now, and it'll be on the August ballot. I know I breezed through that, but luckily, we were able to spend a lot of time on this last week. So again, if anybody wants to see any details, I encourage them to go out to our website and watch that video. But I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions from the board? Mrs. Bonnefield?
Mrs. Smith, when, on the general fund page.
Yep.
You mentioned that, we usually see a difference between what our ending balance is because we, go conservatively and what our beginning balance is. Do you know approximately what that percentage, that we're usually off and how that, when, under audit circumstances, where we expect to be? How
Yes,
that- how
yep.
that-
I'm happy to report that our last budget, last school year, the 17-18 school year, our budget for both the revenue and the expenditures had a 99% accuracy rate. But because of the large budget that we maintain, that equated to, I believe it was the revenue came in better by $1 million and the expenditures came in better by $1.5 million. So between revenue and expenditures, last year we saw it to the good by $2.5 million. Because this is something new that our district is a change in the process, we did want to be conservative with that. We didn't want to bank on that same good fortune, but we did feel like $1 million would be a comfortable estimate to use for the 1920 school year.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonifant. Any other questions? I just had one. You mentioned the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. When is that expected to expire?
That was a 6-year millage set to expire in 2022.
Anything else from the board? Mrs. Frank?
I just wanted to say, too, whenever you see the increase in the ending fund balance, that is due to the Wayne County Enhancement Millage, which I think that you mentioned, but as a thank you to all of our voters, that really helped us financially in terms of, as a district, to be able to provide things in the classroom, and that's where you kind of see this jump in our ending fund balances when that came into effect.
Yes, and I will jump back again. We talked about this last week. You can see the Wayne County Enhancement Millage passed in November of 2016, but we can see even before that in 2015, from 2015 to 2016, we did see an increase in our fund balance, and that was because of the revenue enhancement initiatives, made by the board, as well as the cost containment. So it wasn't something that the district wasn't aware of. It was something that we've been working towards, gaining that financial stability. But where we really do see the growth, to your point, is with the passage of the Wayne County Enhancement Millage. And very intentionally, that millage passed in November of 2016, and it went 100% on the winter tax bills for 2016. And so our district started to collect that during the 16-17 school year, but we purposefully spent a lot of time before we instituted any new expenditures, and so we didn't put any new expenditures into place until the 2017-18 school year, so that allowed us to make some headway as far as financial stability and our fund balance.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mrs. Smith, for presenting that to us.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. That'll take us to item 3, audience communication. Anyone who wants to address the board with regard to the public hearing can do so at this time. I don't have any blue slips. I don't see anyone rushing to the table with blue slips. So that will bring our public hearing to a close. I will just indicate that we are not going to go off camera. We'll go right into our regular meeting. And if there's no other business to be brought at the public hearing, then we are adjourned. Now, welcome to the regular meeting for June 17th, 2019. Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford?
Here.
Mrs. Burton?
Here.
Mr. Centers?
Here.
Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield is here. President Johnson?
Here, we have a quorum. Thank you. And Mr. Centers, would you lead us in the pledge this evening?
I pledge allegiance
Again, welcome. We have a relatively full house tonight. It's nice to see everyone here. Wanted to let you know that this is our regular meeting, and you will not hear the level of discussion on the items that become before the board tonight. We've already talked about these on at least 2 different occasions. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and listen to all of the discussion, I invite you to tune into our Committee of the Whole meetings. If you haven't watched them in person, you can watch them online. and you'll get a better flavor of all of the discussions that we talk about. For those of you who are in the audience who want to follow along with the agenda, we have them outside the door to the left. And if you turn to the right, there's a table that has not only the agendas, but our blue slips that you can fill out. Anyone who wants to address the board tonight, please fill out one of those and hand them to anyone at the table, and they can get down to me. For those of you who are watching at home, you can go to our website, livoniapublicschools.org, highlight over the board tab, and drop down to the agenda, and you can follow along with us this evening. We have a relatively full agenda, and we'll get to it as quickly as we can. Anybody who's tuned in over the last year or so has noticed that one of the first things that I do at the beginning of our meeting is I read our district climate goal. We think that that is an extremely important part of our meeting and of our culture, and it reads, all students will experience a positive, safe, and welcoming environment where both students and adults respect and value one another. We feel that as a board that is extremely important. And as I say, I sound like a broken record, but I say it every meeting, is that the respect that you can have differences in opinion, but you respect the other person. This board is not always in agreement on the issues, but we have respectful discussion, we hash out our differences, and we come to a consensus. We feel we are the ones who set the example for the community. And I ask that anyone that comes to the podium tonight to address the board, we will give you the utmost respect, and we ask that in return. It's the best thing that we can do to set an example for our community. Thank you. So we'll move on now to item 3, our communications, and Mrs. Jenkins.
Good evening, President Johnson, members of the board, Superintendent Oquist. I cannot think of a better way to close out the school year than to highlight a member of our school community who makes a difference in the lives of some of our youngest learners here in LPS. We have a special way of recognizing our awesome volunteers in our district, and it's called the Golden Apple Award. The Golden Apple Award is issued to those who go above and beyond that which is expected, doing so with exceptional care, concern, and genuine passion to improve the school experience for our students and our staff. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Nancy Kelly as our latest recipient of this very special award. Let's give Nancy a round of applause as she makes her way to the podium. I'm going to brag about you a little bit here.
I'll listen
for a
to
few
you.
minutes. Okay. Nancy is actually a retired Livonia Public Schools teacher who taught for 23 years. Throughout those years, she taught kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade, not all at the same time, at Buchanan, Grant, Marshall, and Cass Elementary Schools. Nancy now volunteers her time working with students in all 4 kindergarten classrooms at Buchanan Elementary. Assisting these little ones with their reading skills is Nancy's focus and her exceptional talent, as she is a trained reading specialist. Nancy was nominated by Buchanan kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Sue Stromberg. In her nomination, Mrs. Stromberg notes that Nancy's skills not only benefit the students, but also the staff at Buchanan. She said Nancy's expertise is valued by the teachers, and she will often ask Nancy for advice on improving her own teaching skills. This coming from a veteran teacher. In the nomination, Sue says, watching Nancy is truly like watching a master teacher. She listens and watches the students and lets their interests and ideas guide the lesson. She often lets the students play teacher. I like that. Or she has them use their imagination as they shop at the store for words. Nancy is described as humble, well-organized, and a professional who easily moves from group to group in all 4 kindergarten classrooms at Buchanan. As a fun side note, Nancy is Irish, and she loves to share her Irish heritage through song and dance and stories with the children. Nancy believes we are put on this earth to make a difference in the lives of others. And she is certainly doing that through her dedicated volunteer work at Buchanan. At this time, I would like to invite Board President Mark Johnson to join us at the podium to present the Golden Apple Award.
Nancy, it is certainly my pleasure and a privilege to award you the Golden Apple Award for all the wonderful volunteer work that you do for the school. And just a couple of things that I want to mention, and some of these are from Jonathan Wenstrom. And anybody knows Jonathan?
Oh, my heavens.
He writes that Nancy is an amazing part of our Buchanan team. She works with all 4 of our kindergarten classrooms, and as a retired teacher, she brings her wealth of experience. Her experience, combined with her positive attitude and love for children, has inspired both students and staff at Buchanan. They also indicate that you have a wonderful way with the students and you're full of energy. You can tell that just by seeing you.
Thank you.
Her encouraging words and interesting lessons create a positive feeling. Her kind and loving demeanor give children a feeling of self-worth and instill confidence. And it's just wonderful that you, as a retired teacher, would come back and volunteer and do this kind of work. It is people like you that make this district as great as it is, and we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is amazing. I'm not one to get an award normally, but Wayne Dwyer once said, and he was a great psychologist, one day his first grade student came in, his little girl, and had the first spelling test, and she went, "Oh my gosh, look at the spelling test." And he said, "How wonderful is this?" And she said, "Look at my sticker." And he said, what was so important about this? And she goes, "Well, I got 100%. And he goes, "That's what made that important. It wasn't the sticker. It was your effort." The next week she comes home again on Friday and she says, "Oh my goodness, here's my spelling test." And he looked at it and he said, "You got 100%. She said, "I did." He goes, "But up in the corner, there's a little sticky stuff. What is that from?" And she said, "I took my sticker off. I didn't need it to feel good. I gave it to somebody else in the class." So all these years, that's exactly the way I have thought. He said, there are never such thing as could have beens, but there are such things of what if. What if we can make a difference? What if in our classroom, and our teachers do that? The 4 teachers I work with are unbelievable. They're miraculous. When I wake on Tuesday and Wednesday mornings, when I wake up, I cannot wait to get to Buchanan to see those children. But the 4 teachers, Mrs. Stromberg, Mrs. McQuiggan, Mrs. Hapla, Mrs. Pillay, they give me those children as if they were gold, as if they were a treasure to work with. Their respect for those students is just priceless. And being old, 71, I like to see that legacy passed down. But then when I walk into those classrooms and see what our teachers are doing, and I have them right now, there are goosebumps going up and down my arm. It's just amazing. And they trust what I do. Oh my goodness. So there are no such things as could have beens. They're what if. What if we can make a difference? What if we can change the world through these little children? And then it's about Mr. Wenstrom. I can still remember, I have to tell a quick story about him. They were having last year a Wilderness March reading month. And I looked at him and I said, "Mr. Wenstrom, Do you happen to own a jungle hat? No, I don't. Would you like one? Yes, I would. I have one you can borrow. I was teaching the kids in the hallway, and I see this principal walking down with a book to your classrooms with a jungle hat on. Tell me that that isn't priceless. Tell me if that interaction with the staff and the students isn't priceless. 2 weeks later, I go, Mr. Winstrom, do you happen to own a Mountie hat? And he goes, no. I said, would you like one? So this is basically what I am experiencing and having fun. And you mentioned the Irish dancing. Do you realize when you get to be 71 and you still have to dance in all those classrooms? I thought, oh my gosh, I better shape up. So I joined the rec center just because of Livonia Public Schools. So I am in probably a little bit better shape now than I was, last December.
Yeah.
And were we able to do the jig? We were. Will we do it next year? Oh, we will. That's the fun of it. And then I started thinking, it's volunteering. That's important. But it needs to go beyond me and go into the community. And I started thinking, all of you work so hard. You work beyond hours. And that includes parents. Oh my gosh, I have 2 kids, Aaron and PJ. They are always, and their spouses, dedicated to their kids. And how do we pass the idea of volunteering to the kids? I have to get Grant I have to just tell one story. Being the little old lady on the block, once in a while I'll get up on some Monday morning and my garbage is put out. The little boy across the street does it. So I went over and I said, Stan, Thomas took my garbage out. He goes, can I pay him? And he goes, no. My mother taught me that we are to do things for neighbors in our community. That's the message I think I'm supposed to give tonight. When we have our kids, when we have our grandkids, we still need to teach them to give, because that's where it starts, with the wee ones that we teach as parents and as teachers. So you gave me a minute to speak, and I think I better stop. So thank you so much for everything. And have I always loved Livonia? Oh, yes. And thank you for letting me continue to teach in Livonia from the heart and the soul. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are going to take just a short break after our next item, our update from the superintendent, so that we can all congratulate you individually. So, Mrs. Oquist, we'll move on to the update from our
I think we would have been
superintendent.
better off taking a break.
You don't want to follow that?
It's difficult to follow the wonderful Mrs. Kelly. She is a treasure beyond treasure. I've had the privilege of knowing her for over 30 years, and she lights up the classroom. She has blessed literally hundreds of students with the treasure that she is, and she continues to do so, and we are so lucky. Thank you. So we have some other folks to celebrate. We're going to spend a few minutes with that. First, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Terrio. Dr. Terrio, you want to wave your hand? Dr. Terrio was recently honored with a very prestigious award by the Michigan Association of Administrators of Special Education, the acronym MACE. They honored her with the Patricia Gilchrist Fraser Award. This annual award recognizes the outstanding service and leadership of a public school special education director who has implemented innovative programming that contributes to the field of special education and who demonstrates qualities of service, leadership, vision, and collaboration. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Terriel leading our Student Services Department and advocating on a daily basis for our students throughout the district. So I'd like to share our warmest congratulations and great pride for her work. Congratulations go out to Churchill student Yasvin Ravan. Yasvin, who will be a junior this fall, just completed his sophomore year, was selected from over 1,000 high school students who tested and over 20 students that attended the Chemistry Olympiad Science Camp at the University of Maryland. He was selected to be one of 4 team members who will represent the United States in Paris, France, in the International Chemistry Olympiad. Wow. This event will take place later in July, and this is the second year that he is placed in the top 20 of the Chemistry Olympians and is the youngest student on this year's team. You may also recall that earlier this year we recognized him for his top 20 finish in the Michigan Mathematics Prize competition. Mr. Doug Coates, MSC coordinator, offers his praise and acclaim for Yasvin's academic prowess and is thrilled that he has another 2 years of high school with us. I'd also like to thank his teacher, Mr. Upton, for all of his additional prep with Yasvin this year and getting him ready for this. So what an honor, one of 4 students from across the nation. That's pretty remarkable. We'd like to share congratulations with Franklin head coach of varsity baseball, Matt Fournier, who is a teacher at Emerson Middle School. Matt has been selected by his coaching peers to be the head coach of the East All-Star High School baseball team in their big matchup this Thursday, June 20th at Ford Field. They will be going against Michigan's West All-Star team. Coaches are chosen for their contribution to the character development of high school athletes, as well as their dedication to high school baseball. If any of you know Coach Fournier and know Matt, he gives a tremendous amount of time, energy, dedication, and care to not only his student athletes, but also to the field and to the entire Franklin community. And Coach Fournier's son, Cal, who is a Franklin 2019 graduate, was also selected as an all-star for Thursday's game. So a pretty exciting time for our Franklin baseball group. I'd like to acknowledge the student internship program. So as you know, we have the career intern program and the vocational intern program. So I just wanted to mention that we had medical students who interned across the area, and approximately 11 students were offered jobs after their internships. This year there are 10 students in the skilled trades internship program, and 14 are signed up for next year. We continue to see that as a growing area. They'll be working in the Ford Collision Shop, Ford Quick Lane, at Roush, OHM, and Sanborn & Sons. A few more. We had over $1 million in scholarship money offered to just that small group of interns in the class of 2019. So that's in addition to the scholarship totals that we shared with you the last meeting. Finally, we'll hold a second informational meeting on the millage and sinking fund proposals. That will be on July 17th. Be sure to mark your calendars. 6 p.m. in the administration building. We'd love to have you here to share more information about the 2 proposals on the August 6th ballot for the sinking fund and the operating millage renewal. And we will be back for our first board meeting of the new year on Wednesday, July 24th. Thank you, President Johnson.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. And at that point, we will take our short recess, for hopefully no more than 5 minutes or so. So we'll be back. Thank you. Thank you. And we are back, and we are also going to take another short break after item 6, I think it's E, after our approval of the SEALS contract. So everybody just sit tight until we're done with that, if you will. Okay, moving on, we're at item 3C, written communications. Are there any written communications?
No.
Seeing none, we are at D, audience communications. I do not have any blue slips. Does anybody have any blue slips? Anyone want to address the board tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3E, response to prior audience communication. I do not have any. Are there any responses? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 4, our consent agenda. And may I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bradford.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of June 3rd, 2019. 5B, minutes of the special meeting of June 3rd, 2019. 5C, minutes of the closed session of June 3rd, 2019. 5D, minutes of the special meeting of June 10th, 2019. 5E, minutes of the closed session of June 10th, 2019. 8A, approval of the 2019-2020 lease renewals for Garfield Cooperative Preschool, Get Skills Basketball, Himawari Preschool, The Learning Tree, Livonia Little Tots. 8B, approval of bid results for copy paper purchase.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Are there any questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries.
You got them?
Yes, we have them coming down. While we're doing that as well, normally we would, after each of the contract approvals, we would normally have the groups come up. We're going to hold that, and we'll do that at the recess, and we can do them all at one time. Makes it a little bit easier. Okay, then that takes us to item 6, personnel matters, and 6A is appointment of elementary principal. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Frank.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Christina Collier as elementary principal at Coolidge Elementary School beginning July 1st, 2019.
Support. Stereo. We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And Mrs. Oquist, are you going to handle this?
Mr. Archibald is going to get us
Mr.
started, and I will
Archibald,
bring
get
us
us rolling.
home.
All right, thank you. Just some of the background. Christy has a bachelor's degree in English and elementary education from Madonna, a Master of Science in Administration from Madonna, an endorsement in Autism Spectrum Disorder from Madonna. She taught in Livonia in lower grades 1 through 3 and from August of 2001 through June of 2010. Was also an elementary support teacher from 2010 to 2015, and her most current role, which will end tonight, is assistant principal at Cooper Upper Elementary School, where she has been the assistant principal since 2015. Superintendent Oquist?
Thank you. It is with great pleasure from our Board of our Board of Education that we bring this recommendation forward to you. Christy has served our district for the past 19 years in numerous ways. As Mr. Archibald shared, as a classroom teacher, as an elementary support teacher, and as an assistant principal, as well as an I believe I already shared, elementary support teacher. She has a background in working with students in the autism spectrum disorder and has served our district in many school communities and in many capacities. I'm sure you've been impressed with her resume and her background. She has not only done that here in the district, but has also served as part of a leadership cohort through Leadership Matters, is a Galileo Leader alumni, and has participated in numerous district and school-wide committees that have positively impacted the work we do with our students and our staff. I'd like to take a moment to thank the Coolidge staff for meeting with Mr. Archibald and with me a couple of weeks ago. You were instrumental in helping us create the profile of a leader for your amazing school. We are so proud of the work that you do each and every day, and we're excited to be recommending Mrs. Collier to be the next leader of Coolidge Elementary.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Questions or comments from the board? Just congratulations.
Congratulations.
This is going to be
Vote
tough.
hasn't been taken yet. So we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford.
No pressure.
No pressure. For the appointment of Christy Collier as elementary principal. Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
We need to correct this. Support was Mrs. Burton. I think we're going to be good either way.
Are we?
Either way?
Yep.
Oh, for
Okay.
sure.
All right. Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Guys got me. Okay, Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Centers.
Yes.
And Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
And Mrs. Bonifield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes. That motion carries. Congratulations.
Okay, thank you. President Johnson, Livonia School Board, Superintendent Oquist, Cabinet. I want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I want to help Livonia grow, and you have given me that door to open. I am dedicated to this district, and I will work hard to make sure that when everyone who walks through our doors at Coolidge knows that they are loved and cared for and supported. Our school community is a home away from home, and our students and I, along with our staff, will make sure that they have the best experience possible. I would like to take a minute to thank some very important people in my life. I have a fan club, that's great. First, I would like to thank my mom and my dad, Diane and Joe. They're just always a phone call away. They're such great role models for me. My mom has been a role model since, age 2, I was playing teacher in the basement. She has taught me the importance of education and following my passion. And a fun fact, we both became a principal at the same age. That's kind of weird. I would like to thank my husband, Dan, for going with the flow and handling our busy schedule. He's been my biggest supporter, and he knows when I'm having a bad day, I arrive home to a hot fudge ice cream sundae sitting on my bedside table. He knows I don't even need dinner, just that. So thank you for supporting me. I would like to thank my son, Ian, and daughter, Ava. She's at POM right now. You know, POM camp is a week away, so she couldn't miss. She's at Livonia Stevenson, so we're happy to have her there. And they teach me how to persevere, and they teach me to stay grounded and to what matters most. I like to also thank my friends who surprised me. They're a little extra, as you can see the balloons, but they're always a great support system. This one's going to be hard. To the Cooper staff, thank you. Thank you for helping me grow as a leader. You have shown me what's important. You have taught me that you have to focus on building solid relationships. That's important. And you have to show our students that they are true leaders within our building. I'm going to miss you very much, but I will only be a phone call away, an email. Maybe I'll even send a video your way. I told them when I first learned about the appointment on Friday, we had a staff meeting, and I shared one of my favorite quotes with them. It's by Winnie the Pooh. See why I need to go back to K4? But it says, "How lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so very hard. I'm going to miss you all, and every little piece of you is taken with me. So thank you." And now for the Coolidge staff. I'm so very excited. I would like to thank Mr. Grizak. I have some big shoes to fill, and I'm going to make each and every one of you proud, along with our students and our parents and the community. Coolidge is a very special place for me. I first began teaching at Coolidge, and my son Ian attended kindergarten through 4th grade, and I met a very special person, Ann Kalick, there. And she saw something special in me, and she encouraged me to be the leader who I am today. So I will always remember Ann and thank her for her dedication and support. I'm coming back home, so I'm so excited. And thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope to make you guys proud.
You've got great support.
Yeah.
That'll move us on to item 6B, appointment of assessment coordinator. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Jarvis. Was that?
Working on. Did you bring your fan club? You guys want to do double duty, that's fine. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Benjamin Hillard as the assessment coordinator in the Academic Services Department beginning August 5th, 2019.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis. Supported by everybody to my left. Supported by Mr. Centers. Okay. Mr. Archibald, are you going to start the one off too?
I am. Just some short stats here on Mr. Hillard. He has a Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education from Eastern Michigan University, a Master's of Arts in Education with a specialty in Mathematics Enhancement and Leadership from the University of Michigan Dearborn. He has taught elementary grades 2 through 6 here in Livonia from August 2008 to June of 2015. During that time, he also served as the ACAT teacher facilitator for a few years, and his current role, again, which should end tonight, is the K-12 Math and Science Coordinator for the district. Mrs. Oquist?
Thank you. We are very excited to bring a recommendation for Mr. Hillard to be appointed academic assessment coordinator. As we shared last week during our budget discussion, and we discussed why we were shifting some of the responsibilities of this role. At that point in time, we certainly had Mr. Hillard's process just about complete and really envision the next steps that he will take us in this area. He has some tremendous ideas, has worked very closely with Mrs. Marcosi, who has done a tremendous job in our assessment department. Ben has had the ability to build relationships across our district, K-12, in his current role as a math science coordinator, and certainly has had the experience in the classroom and also as the ACAT facilitator to bring forth as well. His knowledge, his enthusiasm for this role really was unmatched, and we, as with both positions, had some outstanding candidates to consider. So we are very excited to be bringing this recommendation forward to you and believe he is the right person to take on this role.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton.
It is wonderful. One of the reasons we
we brought our children to Livonia Public Schools is because of the enormous wide variety of academic and extracurricular offerings that we have. But at the core of school, we need to educate our children, and it gives us such confidence to have someone like you in this role who's taking control of some of the nitty-gritty stuff that is vitally important to measuring our success. We see our success in so many different areas, but in this data-driven world that we're in right now, we need to have that information. We need to have it accurate, and we need to have it so it's usable and ready for our educators to take into the classroom and make them better educators for each one of their groups of 25 to 30 kids that they have. But thank you so much for all the talents that you bring to this role.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonifield. Other questions or comments?
One other thing.
Mrs. Burton?
If no one, yeah. One more thing. You guys win the prize for the most enthusiastic audience we've had all year long. So you can come back anytime. Yeah. Not even close.
Pandering. I call pandering.
Yeah, I would agree. Our meetings are not normally this lively, but I'm all for it. This is
Absolutely.
exciting. Yeah.
When did I lose control?
A long time ago. But yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Centers, for the appointment of Mr. Hillard as assessment coordinator. Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
I would love to. Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, motion carries. Congratulations.
I'll also thank the Cooper and Coolidge staff. They stuck around for this one. Great people. When this role was expanded and created, I was ecstatic because I really think that this has the ability to make a great impact on the district and really help our students and our teachers. So it's with great honor that I feel that I'm able to step into this role. I was thrilled, excited to apply, and just really honored to be in it. I've spent 4 years in the Academic Services Department working with a great team. I look forward to continuing that. It's such an exciting way to serve our students and our teachers, even out of the classroom, and it is hard to leave the classroom if you've ever, when you're in it, to miss the kids. But being able to serve our great teachers, being able to still serve the students has been wonderful. I've been able to work alongside awesome teachers in the math and science realm, so I really look forward to continuing to work with them, so I don't need to say the teary goodbyes or anything that Mrs. Collier had to, so I know I'll still get to work with all those awesome teachers and even more so. So I look forward. My family, unfortunately, as you can see, my row is very empty. Yeah. They had other activities, so they're not here tonight, but thank you. Thank you. So I have some surrogate family here that I'll take. But my wife is also a teacher in this district, and she is wonderful. I couldn't do it without her support. She's carting our kids to all their different activities today. I have 3 amazing kids, and just in the same way I encourage them to take risks and step out of their comfort zone, they do the same to me. So I think that's really helped me the past several years to take on these challenges, to look for ways that I can serve, and hopefully I set myself up as a model for them to follow. So I really thank them. I'll have it on the record, even though they're not here. I'll tell them to watch the tape that I have thanked them, and you can be my witnesses. But a thank you to the board and everyone, and I really look forward to stepping in this role. Thank you very much.
All right, that'll take us to item 6C, approval of the collective bargaining agreement between Livonia Public Schools and the Livonia Paraprofessionals Association, LPA. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education enter into a 3-year contract with the Livonia Paraprofessionals Association, whose agreement has been ratified by LPA members. Said contract shall commence July 1st, 2019, and continue through June 30th, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And is this
Mr. McDonald.
Mr. McDonald? You look a lot like Mr. Archibald.
I'm not sure who you just insulted. Thank you, President Johnson, for the opportunity to speak on the LPA settlement agreement that we have. It was a pleasure to work with this group as well as the board team. Both teams put in a lot of effort and have worked through some pretty difficult issues. And I think we all believe that we have a very fair settlement that we are bringing to you this evening. In addition to that, I think we've also built some great relations across the table. It was actually a pleasure to get to understand their perspective, and I think for us to be able to have them understand our perspective as we work through some of those items that we passed in through the bargaining process.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford, for the approval of the collective bargaining agreement between Livonia Public Schools School District and the Livonia Paraprofessionals Association. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6D, approval of collective bargaining agreement between the Livonia Public Schools and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mr. Centers.
move that the Board of Education enter into a 3-year contract with AFSCME Local 117, whose agreement has been ratified by AFSCME members. Said contract is to commence July 1st, 2019, and expire June 30th, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Mr. McDonald?
Thank you again. I would again like to thank both teams for all their effort, time, and preparation they put forth in being able to come up together with this settlement agreement that we bring to you this evening.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of the collective bargaining agreement between Livonia Public Schools School District and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6E, approval of the collective bargaining agreement between Livonia Public Schools School District and the Supervisory Employees Association, SEALS. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bradford.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools enter into a 3-year contract with the SEALS Union, whose agreement was ratified by SEALS members. Said contract is to commence July 1st, 2019, and continue through June 30th, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Centers. Switching. Mr. Archibald. You look just like Mr. McDonald.
I'm going to leave that alone. Just a brief comment. It was a privilege. We've been involved with collective bargaining since the first week in January with one or more groups. And as we talk with our counterparts in other districts, I don't think it goes as well there as it does here. And I don't just mean by the agreements, but by the process we follow and the professionalism and the respectful dialogue and the collaborative spirit that's displayed by the teams on both sides of the table. And it really, we don't always agree with one another, but I think there's very little that we can't get through together. And however it is, we're all part of the same team and sharing a common bond for what's in the best interest of our district and what's in the best interest of our employees. And in this case, it's our SEALS organization, and we're very excited to bring this agreement to you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Archibald. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Centers, for the approval of the collective bargaining agreement between Livonia Public Schools School District and the Supervisory Employees Association, SEALS. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask the members of each bargaining team for both the district, for the LPA, SEALs, and AFSCME to please stand and be recognized if you're here this evening. So you see many folks across this room who worked very hard together to come up with these agreements. We are very, very pleased to be bringing them to you this evening and are thrilled that they've been ratified by each of the groups. These folks represent over 600 of our staff who do vital work on behalf of our students and on behalf of our district. And we are so proud of each and every one of them and very pleased to be bringing these to you this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Before we take our short break, I just want to reiterate, and I think Mr. Archibald said it pretty well. I always start off our meetings with our district climate goal that talks about respect. And we get updates, and we had nothing but good, positive information all around of the respectful discussions that were had during these processes. And thank you all for doing that. We appreciate it. Thank you. And with that, we will take a short recess. Thank you. Yes.
Teams to please come up and sign.
All right, we are back for the remainder of our agenda, and that will move us to item 6G. F, I guess it's F now.
What are
Yep,
we at now?
6F, resignations. This is for board information only, no motion is required, so that will take us to item 6G, separation agreement. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of Livonia Public Schools School District approve the separation agreement between the Livonia Public Schools School District, Livonia Educational Association, LEA, and Donna Wazinski.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Sorry, Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. That takes us to item 7, our instructional matters. And item 7A is approval to purchase science textbooks, textbook program for grades 6 through 8. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District purchase the textbook program Amplify from Amplify Science for grades 6 through 8 at a total cost of $393,804.95, with $30,087.85 in complimentary materials.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Burton. And good evening, Mrs. O'Brien. You going to help us with this?
Johnson, how are you?
Good.
This evening, this program is being recommended by our 6-8, grade 6 and through 8th grade science committee. This committee was comprised of teachers from all 3 of our middle schools and 2 of our upper elementary schools, and teachers from Nigiero and Webster. They spent extensive time reviewing our current Michigan state standards and the next generation science standards. They evaluated the program on 4 main categories: purpose, student engagement, curriculum, and assessment for learning. They worked over the past 2 years. They went through 8 programs and piloted 3 of them this past school year. At the end of the pilot, for each set of materials, students were surveyed for each one of them with their perceptions on their level of understanding of the science that was covered. Students overwhelmingly preferred the Amplify program over the other 2. Additionally, this spring, Ed Reports, which is an independent nonprofit company that reviews instructional materials, released a rating for Amplify, and it was the only science program that they reviewed that was green in all areas, which means it was highly aligned to the next generation science standards, which supported what our committee was bringing to this evening for our recommendation. So our total cost for the Amplify program is $393,804.95. This program provides a mostly online experience with simulations that students participate with, but it also has non-tech day lessons, so the teacher's guide has both of those things. We will be printing some student work pages for the first year and see what the teacher's needs are after that first year of implementation. Funds for this purchase would come from our district textbook budget, which has been supported by the Wayne County Enhancement Millage.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Questions or comments from the board? No. Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the approval to purchase science textbook program for grades 6 through 8. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. That takes us to item 7B, approval to purchase Chromebooks. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District purchase Chromebooks and carts from Presidio for upper elementary schools and a small number for middle schools at a total cost of $196,207.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And again, Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you again. Tonight, we're bringing a recommendation to purchase some additional Chromebooks and carts using the district technology funds to use in our upper elementary schools and one of our middle schools. Currently, all of our schools are close to a 2-to-1 ratio within grade levels and departments sharing carts. As we have been adopting new textbooks, like the Amplify Science program, we are continuing to find that we have the need for some additional Chromebooks for students to use during the day in their classrooms. It's no longer just a copy of the textbook, but it provides instructional experiences that a typical textbook cannot offer, and experiences for students in order to better learn the concepts taught. So this recommendation is to purchase 13 carts of 35 Chromebooks in each and 5 additional carts so that we could take some of the extra Chromebooks out of other carts and create additional sets for classrooms to use. There's a total of 455 Chromebooks and 18 charging carts. The total for this purchase is $196,207, and again, will come from our district technology fund.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Questions, comments from the board? The only question I have, Mrs. O'Brien, and you may or may not be able to answer, I know technology moves pretty quick. How long do we expect Chromebooks like these to have a useful life?
Mr. Klan says they last from 4 to 6 years fully functioning and then begin to lose because they don't have as much of a hard drive as a laptop does. So there's only so many updates that it can take, and then it begins to break down. That's not to say they stop working in that amount of time. It just means they begin to have problems. And so then they don't last as long as a typical laptop.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval to purchase Chromebooks. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. That takes us now to item 8, our business matters, and we've already handled A and B in our consent agenda, so we'll move to item 8C, approval of bid results for heaters in student restrooms at Randolph Elementary. May I have a motion?
President Johnson,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've noticed that there's just a missing piece to the motion. Before you read it and get into it, I noticed that the contingency isn't on there. So I was hoping that we could perhaps just add at the end of it, plus $3,800 in contingency for a total amount of $79,088.
Okay,
I apologize for that omission.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Francis.
Thank you.
May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson?
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Move the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase and installation of radiant heaters in student restrooms at Randolph Elementary from Douglas Mechanical, Livonia, Michigan, in the amount of $75,288, plus $3,800 in contingency, for a total amount of $79,088.
Support?
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Burton. Would you like to add to that, Mr. Francis?
I will give a brief background for those at home who weren't tuned in for the Committee of the Whole. Randolph Elementary, a typical elementary school, our typical lower elementary school, has classroom restrooms, and we have found that in the past 2 winters, these restrooms, we were having a difficult time regulating the temperature in them to be at a warm enough temperature that we would like it set at. Some that's based upon the way that the set point is in the classroom being read from the thermostat in there. Another portion of it is that those restrooms are on exterior walls with blocks, so it's a little colder. We've worked over the past 2 winters to make adjustments from the mechanical end of the system, and without enough improved success in that method or those methods to meet our satisfaction for the students. So we recommend this purchase and installation of the radiant heaters in those 20 restrooms to be completed this late summer and early fall before the heating season begins. And that would give us the room temperature that we do desire for the students to have in there.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton?
This is for just Randolph Elementary. To our knowledge, this is the only building that we're having this specific issue, and our other buildings are comfortable in it.
To my knowledge, and this has been something that's been on our radar, as I mentioned, for the past two seasons. So it's been something that we're told about, have worked on, and have not heard from another building a similar concern.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? And just for the folks that may not have tuned into the committee of the whole, these are not freestanding radiant heat.
No, these are built in. There's actually a handful of restrooms that already have them at Randolph. They would be very similar, built into the wall, hardwired into the system.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the approval of bid results for heaters in student restrooms at Randolph Elementary. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes. Motion carries. That takes us to item 8D, approval of bid results for door hardware, Michigan State Police Safety Grant. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mr. Centers?
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of door hardware from FBH Architectural Security, Flint, Michigan, in the amount of $61,235, plus a contingency in the amount of $3,000, for a total approved amount of $64,235.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Center, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And Mr. Francis?
Yes, the district is seeking to convert some door hardware at several buildings, 7 to be exact, to change out the current hardware to what we call a thumb lock. It's a quick lock that the vast majority of our doors, classroom doors across the buildings across the district already has installed during the renovations. These are doors that were in very good condition when renovations occurred. It did not make sense to change out the doors, or at the time, even the hardware, because we were trying to be very fiscally responsible during the renovations of these buildings. This can be as few as 1 or 2 in a building, up to more, dozens of doors, however, in any particular building. But we've been looking the past school year to make this update. It was estimated to be quite costly. We actually have worked to bring the cost down by having our maintenance department do the labor portion of this. And by putting out to bid, you can see where our total has landed in competitive bid. And actually, the icing on the cake for this is that the Michigan State Police Safety Grant was out, and the district had applied and won that grant. It's a reimbursement grant, so the district will put out the funds through the general fund to pay for these locks. We will then complete the documentation that Michigan State Police Grant has given us, and we would be reimbursed upon the successful completion of the project and payment to the company.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of bid results for door hardware, Michigan State Police Safety Grant. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, motion carries. That takes us to item 8E, adoption of the 2018-19 final budget amendments. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bradford?
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached amended budgets for the 2018-2019 school year. General Fund, Funded Projects Fund, Special Education Fund, Food Services Fund, Health and Welfare Fund, Debt Retirement Funds, 2013 Bond Series 1, 2013 Bond Series 2, 2014 Refunding Bond, Scholarship Fund, 2013 Bond Fund, Capital Project Funds, Sinking Fund, Technology Fund, Capital Projects Fund.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. And Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, President Johnson. I'd once again like to thank the board for the time that you allowed me to go over in detail our final budget amendment for the 2018-19 school year at the committee meeting. We had a chance to spend a lot of time on this, so I won't do the same for tonight, but just a few of the highlights. First off, just a reminder for our community that we do quarterly financial updates that we do publicly at our committee meetings and also at our regular meetings. They take the form of final budget approvals in June for the coming year, and then again in December once we have our student counts in, and then again in June as a final amendment. And then on the off times in October and March, we also bring updates. So some of the changes from our first amendment we were able to cover during the March update. Some of the highlights, though, again, on the revenue side, we received in March a large settlement related to the 2017 Wayne County Enhancement Millage, which is a change from the amendment that was brought to the board in December. Also, for our special ed transportation reimbursement from Rain RESA, we received an additional $400,000 over what's been received for the last several years. So that's been included in this final amendment. On the expenditure side, as we went over in March and again last week, this final amendment aligns our salary and benefits for our staff in line with where we anticipate being as of June 30th. And then also, we had some allocation for textbooks that we don't, we know that we won't be in receipt of those textbooks by the end of this fiscal year. So we've included that in our proposed budget and then removed it from this final amendment.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield, for the adoption of 2018-19 final budget amendments. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes. Motion carries. That takes us to item 8F, adoption of 2019-2020 proposed budgets and millage rates. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached proposed budgets for the 2019-2020 school year. General Fund, Funded Projects Fund, Special Education Fund, Food Services Fund, Health and Wellness Fund, Debt Retirement Funds, 2013 Bond Series 1, 2013 Bond Series 2, 2014 Refunding Bond, Scholarship Fund, 2013 Bond Fund, Capital Projects Funds, Sinking Fund, Technology Fund, Capital Projects Fund, School Activities Fund.
Support. President Johnson?
Yes.
The Health
Health
and Welfare Fund was, I believe, read as Health and Wellness. If we could just reiterate that portion of the motion to the Health and Welfare Fund, please.
Yes, thank you. Everybody catch that? Okay, it's Health and Welfare Fund. All right, support?
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Burton and Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, President Johnson. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to go into detail on the budget assumptions that were made for the 2019-20 school year last week in our committee meeting, as well as during the public hearing held tonight. I would like to point out that the recommended budgets up for your approval tonight do assume the board's support of the millage rates that we presented during the public hearing. Again, those were 18 mills on non-primary residences, 6 mills on commercial personal property, combined 4.1 mills for our debt retirement funds, as well as 1.1101 for the sinking fund.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the adoption of the 2019-2020 proposed budgets and millage rates. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, the motion carries. That takes us to item 9, hearing from board members. And item A is our first reading of Board Policy EBBCA, bomb threats, suspicious devices, and threats of violence. Mr. Francis, are you going to
Yes, sir.
talk about that?
Yes. This is the first reading for Board Policy EBBCA, formerly known under business management as bomb threats, and was last written or revised June of 1988. I would like to read into the record the revised version of EBBCA as the official first reading for the board. Business management, bomb threats, suspicious devices, and threats of violence. The Board of Education authorizes the administration to take precautions and steps as deemed necessary to respond to a bomb threat, a suspicious device, and/or other threats of violence against the district, its properties, or any of its occupants to ensure the safety of all staff and students in the immediate and surrounding areas.
Thank you, Mr. Francis.
You're welcome.
We've had an opportunity at our committee of the whole to discuss this. Is there any further discussion? Everybody good with the language? Okay, then we will bring this on for a second reading at our next regular meeting, which will be in July. Okay. And that takes us to item 9B, hearing from board members. And as we have been accustomed to, this is the time of our meeting when I open it up the floor to any comments, questions, anything from the board. So I'll open it up. Does anybody have anything tonight? Mrs. Bradford. Oh, yes.
Oh, well, I just wanted to make a little amendment to Mrs. Oquist's for the baseball game on Thursday, the high school game. Bobby Cavan from Stevenson is also playing in that game. And so I wanted to wish him luck along with Matt Fournier and his son.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we plan on going, but I know he's representing Stevenson. I don't know if there's anybody else from Churchill
We will
on that
find out
team.
and announce it if
But
there was.
I just wanted to shout out to Bobby for that. So, and I want to wish everybody a wonderful summer break. I think we've had a great year, and I want to wish all my colleagues and friends a happy summer, and thanks for everything that everybody does, Cabinet, on a daily basis. It's nice to be sitting in this seat with such great people, surrounded by good people. So I hope you all have a nice few weeks off at least, although I don't know that you guys are really getting too much of a break. Sorry about that, but I know I'm going to enjoy my few weeks off.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford.
You're
Any,
welcome.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. Firstly, I just wanted to say bon chance to Yashwan as he goes to represent the United States at the International Chemistry Olympiad in Paris in August. That's an incredible honor for our district, for our state, and he keeps continuing to impress us. I also wanted to recognize Mrs. Elizabeth Herring, who is the music teacher at Churchill, who has once again been nominated for a Grammy Award. Last year, you may remember, she made it to the top 10, and maybe this year she'll go all the way. What a tremendous honor. And I'd also like to just echo what Mrs. Bradford said and wish everyone a happy and safe summer. Please participate in your local library reading program. Read, 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 and enjoy your summer. Take a little well-deserved break.
Thank you, Mr. Jarvis. Anything else? Mrs. Bonnefield.
I just wanted to give a shout out to one of our newest Eagle Scouts, my son Trevor Bonnefield.
Yay.
From Troop 271, made his Eagle Scout. So we have yet again another great accomplishment in our from our school and our education system. So he just graduated, and so we got 2 things checked off the list. So
Could you share his service project?
Trevor did little libraries and installed those in a couple of the local parks.
Oh,
So
excellent. Oh,
we're
that's
very
wonderful.
proud of him.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. Anything else? My wife and I, as people may know, my special needs son just graduated from Cook School. He's going to be 26 next month. And we just wanted to extend our appreciation to Livonia Transportation System, our school system. Eric's been riding the bus to Cook for 10 years, but he actually started at Webster many, many years ago. The bus drivers, the parapros, every day they get them to school, they bring them home safely. It's not easy with the kids on that bus, the special needs kids. The drivers are outstanding, the paraprofessionals are outstanding, and we just wanted to extend our appreciation to everything that they do. So thank you.
And happy
Congratulations.
Well, he'll be 26 next month, so
That's awesome.
now I got to figure out what to do with him.
Oh, he'll bring you much joy, as he does every day.
And thank you to Mrs. Bradford for attending his graduation last Wednesday.
Oh, you're welcome.
It was quite a
my
surprise
pleasure.
to see you there. Much appreciated. Thank
It
you.
was my pleasure. It was a real joy to be a part of that ceremony and see him walk and get his congratulations.
And I know Dr. Terrell wanted to be there, and she had other matters that she had to attend to in Lansing, so thank you for the thought.
Yeah.
Anything else tonight? If not, then we're at the end of the agenda, and we're adjourned. Thank you.